Howdy YouTube, and welcome to this episode of the Gunman. So this video here, I'm going to be taking you guys through a bit of a spot repair on this Hyundai i20. So this is going to be a two-part series. The first part will be taking you guys through the repair procedure. We'll do the primer work as well. The second part will be going through the prep, paint and polishing stages. So as you can see there, just some minor damage, it's nothing major. This car here is actually for a car yard, so I'm sure most of you guys are pretty familiar with the kind of work that car yards want you to do, and it's the cheapest the cheapest way around it. If you can cut a few corners, save the dollars. The simple fact of it is, if you don't quote them cheaply, you won't get the job. That's not to say you have to do a terrible job on it. It just means that you've got to cut a few corners to still make that money. So obviously I'm just releasing that bumper bar so that I don't damage it when I'm doing my prep work and when I'm doing my repair work. I will actually be putting it back in later on, because I find, like, for masking sometimes, for paint, they actually get in the way more when they're sitting out. Not always, but sometimes. Anyway, so obviously first off you've got to assess your damage, have a look at it and decide which way you're going to go about the repair. If there's any high spots, you might want to get yourself a hammer, tap them down. If the low spots were sort of too deep, I might have gone and got like a spot remover or something like that. But as I say, we've got to keep these jobs quick, and if it's just going to be quicker to put a bit of filler in there, have that dry for 5 minutes, sand it out. Sometimes it's just the way you've got to do it, you know. Nothing wrong with a bit of filler. Everyone uses it. Some people, you know, they think they're above filler, but in the reality of it, I'm sure they use just as much as the rest of us. There's nothing wrong with it as long as you dry it out properly before you prime it, and dry your primer out. You shouldn't get too much shrink back either. So this is technically, I guess you'd call it a smart repair. Smart repair stands for small to medium advanced repair technology. So basically that's made possible through the infrared curing lights. Apart from that, there's not much advanced about it other than you're drying your paint and your fillers quite quickly. So I just got some 180 grit on the Orbital sander. Most of the time I use the interface pad. I don't usually like to finish repairs off with the Orbital sander. You can do it if you're good. I've known quite a few panel beaters that they do great repairs, and just about every single time they finish them off with the Orbital sander. It's just like anything, in the right hands, you know, you can do good jobs with totally different methods. As you can see there, I'll just you're sanding back all any flaky paint. If it had have been exposed metal that had rusted over time, it would obviously see if it was just surface rust and maybe sand it off. If it had have started to pit, then I might grind it back and maybe treat the rust or something like that, but wasn't the case for this job. So obviously just buzzed it back with some 180 grit, got the air blower, and just blowing it off just to remove all the dust before I put some filler on. The filler I'm using here is just some U-Pol Expert filler. It's quite good. It's not too runny. I don't like fillers that are too runny. There's one called Dolphin Glaze, which the panel beaters use, and they actually mix that with their rough filler, and I've found that, yeah, if you use it without the rough filler, well then it's too runny. Like if I'm to do a repair like this and I just put that Dolphin Glaze in, it'll just like start running down the panel basically. So this stuff here, it's just that little bit thinner and it'll just stay where you put it basically. It's pretty good to sand out, but and this has been one of my favorites for a while. I also used to like the Worth extra fine polyester filler, but another favorite one of mine, I've used it just recently back at Spray Tech, where I used to have my business. I went over there and helped out on one Saturday, and he had one called Evercoat Easy Sand, and it's awesome. Like, as the name would suggest, it is really easy to sand. So once I run out of these tubes of U-Pol Expert, I will be getting that in next time, definitely. But yeah, as you can see, just applying that filler there. I like to get it in nice and tight. It obviously saves a little bit of sanding if you just slap it in, and it won't sand out properly either. So it's pretty important to spend that little bit of time to make sure you do get that filler in nice. I did decide to just leave a lot of the footage in, so I'll do my best to narrate it and keep you guys interested through the entire video. Come up with little bits of information, but as you can see, I'm just taking my time, making sure I get that in nice and fine. Because what can happen, like if you just chuck it in and you get, like, say if your filler's sort of sitting like that, you can then try and sand it down as much as you like. Sometimes you'll still be left with that wavy panel once you've even when you finish sanding it out. But again, that's just something that's going to come with experience and time. You know, you got to make those mistakes and realize what you've done wrong, and then next time you'll rectify it. So I put the filler in. I've got my infrared curing lights on it to help dry it out, and while I'm waiting for that filler to dry, I've just got the mini polisher to shine up a couple of spots for the color matching stage. And we're just going to be chopping the paintwork off at that line, so we're not even going to be painting the entire quarter panel. Nothing wrong with doing that if it's done correctly, and I'll take you guys through the masking of that in part 2, where we go through the paintwork. But what I'm using here is the Standox Spectro photometer. It's actually Acquire, sorry, is the brand of the Spectro photometer, but it's used through the Standox software. We use the StandoWin program on our computer. The guys come in and update that every month or so, just to make sure we've got the current colours. So yeah, just keeping an eye on that filler. It might take anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. It's actually a bit of a chilly day. Unlike Perth, in the middle of summer, you don't usually, as you can see out there, it's like a bit of a rainy day. You don't usually get that over in Perth. And I was even wearing my jacket at the start of this video, but yeah, as it was, like, if it was a hotter day, whack it in 3 minutes. You don't need those heat lights on it for your filler. Not the case with your primer. You will actually need to bake your primer out, unless you leave it sort of overnight usually. So yeah, just put the colour. Obviously I mix the colour up. One thing I would like to say about colour matching and just doing this entire job, like if there's someone that's sitting at home and they're like, hey, I've got a bit of a dent or a scratch in my quarter panel on my car, and I just want to give it a shot at fixing it myself, we probably would have charged around $300-400, I don't know, dollars to do this job. I'd have to ask my boss. I don't deal with that side of the business here. I just do the work. But you got to realize the tools and equipment that we have and the materials that we have to do this job. So for starters, if you don't have a compressor, you'll need a compressor for the air power. You'll need a spray gun. You need the filler. You'll need the color. You need the clear. And a lot of these things you can't just get in. Like I've probably mixed up 150 mils of color for this job. You can't just go down to a paint supplier and buy 150 mils of color. Most of the time the minimum they will do is 500 mils of color, so that's going to cost you, you know, anywhere from $30 to $50 depending on the brand and depending on what kind of deal you can get. Our general rule of thumb, I think we figured it out, is about $100 a litre. You know, some of the pearls will go above that, quite a fair bit above that, but some of the solid colours go a bit below that. So I think it usually, yeah, averages out to about 50, maybe $55, $60 a litre. So yeah, that's something that you've got to think of. Unless you're already sort of, you got most of the stuff, you know, the like compressor, spray gun, even body fillers. You know, you could probably pay $50 for just a tube of body filler. All those things add up, and it's like, well, it's just cheaper if it's just one time, a once-off scratch or dent on your car. Just pay us to do it. It's our job. We do it every day. We'll have it done in no time. The job will most likely look better. But yeah, I've got no problem with sharing my methods. I understand a lot of the people that watch my videos are spray painters anyway. So yeah, as you can see, just I'm using that that little block. Pretty handy one. It's got like a convex angle on one side and just a flat block on the other side. So if I'm ever wanting to get into those curves, I can flip it up and use the other side of it. So continuing on with the job, just yeah, 180 grit is what I sanded most of that filler at. You could hit it maybe with some 120 grit first if you like, depending on how the filler is and the size of the repair. Even 80 grit, like for larger repairs, sometimes 80 grit's handy, and then just sort of like work your way down through the grades. So this is a bit of a look at that filler, the U-Pole Expert. Pretty good one. I have noticed that like the top layer of this filler does sort of a little bit, it clogs up your sandpaper. It's a little bit tricky to sand, so yeah, maybe just sometimes I just get like an old piece of sandpaper, like an old bit of 180 grit, sand over the top, rip it off, it's going to ruin it, and then get a new piece. And once you've sort of taken that top layer off, it's usually a bit easier to sand. And that's one thing that I noticed that the Evercoat didn't do, that easy sand. So just put a little bit of hardener. I think it's like 2%. It's how are you going to measure that out? You know, you just do it by eye. Some people always used to say golf ball to a pea, something like that. But again, it's just something that over time you're just going to figure out. Like I've done it before where I've put too much hardener in it and it goes off too quick. And another thing that can happen if you put too much hardener in is the bog and the dyes or whatever is inside the hardener can actually bleed through your paintwork, through your primer, through your paint. You'll paint it, give it 2-3 weeks down the track, and it will, like, you'll just see a circle of exactly where your filler was. So that's something to be very careful of. Don't overdo it. But yeah, again, sometimes like as you say, I've done the filler work there. It's probably got it 80% of the way there. But if I was just, and there might have been like 1 or 2 little low spots, if I was just to go and do those spots, sometimes what can happen is in sanding the fresh filler out, you can actually sand next to it, and then you've got rid of this dent here, but next to it you'll actually sand a low spot into it, so it's just easier to reskim the whole thing. Again, just taking that little bit of time to make sure I apply it correctly and get the edges in nice and tight, and don't overfill it. Don't obviously underfill it. If you underfill it, you're going to have to put more in. So obviously I'm just whacking the infrared curing lights on it again, just whack it on for a couple of minutes. I've actually got the timer on that thing, so it's pretty handy to have. I did just skip the footage out of sanding the second layer of filler out, but same principles apply as when I did it the first time. So once I've got the filler mainly sanded out, I need to get rid of those deeper scratches in the paintwork surrounding it. You could use an orbital sander, but sometimes I find that you're better off just using a block to make sure that you're blocking it down all evenly, rather than getting an orbital sander on there and sort of digging highs and lows into it. But yeah, just carefully going around those edges with a bit of 320 grit, and I'm just going over the 180 grit as well with 320 grit. Turns out there was actually like a little bit of a low spot in front of where my filler ends. But I did ask the boss about it. I said, hey, do you want to do that one as well? He said, nah, it's going to take the repair too far. We're going to lose our blend on that quarter panel and we'd have to go into the next panel. They don't want to pay to get that done, and we're not doing work for free, unfortunately. It's just the way the world works, doesn't it? If you want something done, you're going to have to pay for it. At the end of the day, all they need is just to be able to sell the car. That's all the car yard will give a shit about. If they could get the same amount of money for that car with that damage on there, I can just about guarantee you they would sell it. They wouldn't really care. That's what they're like. But yeah, once I got all the prep work done, you can probably see that I used a 500 grit sanding sponge just to go around the edges. You could replace that with a bit of red Scotch Brite if you like though. And then just doing a bit of edge masking, and yeah, just a couple of bits of paper. Be careful if you're just using paper. It's probably best to cover the entire car with a piece of plastic, but I was pretty confident that I'd just be able to keep the low pressure and keep the overspray off most of the car. So yeah, when using the infrared curing lights, it's pretty important to not use plastic, and the paper is actually a good insulator. So things like tail lights, I have done it myself before. It was like in the paint shop and the car was going, and I think there was like a little bit of a run or something like that near a tail light. A good way to dry the runs out is by putting the infrared curing lights on it. It'll cure it right up. You can then use a razor blade, shave it down. Boss is like, come on man, the car's gone, the customer's in the office or whatever it was. Infrared curing lights on it, and I just melted this tail light. And it's like, well, okay, be careful, take my warning. Using the infrared curing lights, and that paper can actually, that will be a good insulator. It's like the homeless people, you see them sleeping with newspapers over them. paper actually is a good insulator. So bit of paper over tail lights is very important. And yeah, as I say, like I've seen it, I think I might have even done it before. You mask the car up with plastic, and then your primer or whatever, you might want to put your infrared curing lights on it, and it will just literally melt that plastic onto the car, you know. So yeah, just be careful with those kinds of things. There's actually a specific tape for using the infrared curing lights, and that was the 3M green tape. It was really good quality. And look, the standard tape does the job most of the time. But what I did find with using like cheaper masking tapes, they can start actually lifting up and peeling back as you're sort of halfway through priming your job. But yeah, when I'm using the infrared curing lights between coats, I like to get it dry completely, and you'll see here in a minute, like I'm actually physically able to put my hand on that primer before I put the next coat on. And yeah, you don't want to hot prime either, so you want to heat it up in between coats, but then make sure it's cool before you put your next coat on. That's why I made sure I put this footage in. I made another video on using the infrared curing lights when priming, and one of the comments was, oh, you shouldn't hot prime. And my reply was, well, I wasn't, I just cut that footage out. So I left it in this time so that you actually can see that I'm blowing the air over the panel, and you can actually see that it's not stinking hot, you know. If you get it around 25 degrees, you're probably pretty right, but what can happen if it's too hot when you're putting your primer on? It can actually start basically bubbling the primer up, and you have like little pinholes inside it as well. And another thing is, if it's not sort of touch dry in between coats either, you can actually trap those solvents in there. It can be all good. Then when you go to do your long bake, like after you've finished priming, you might want to give it like 15-20 minute bake. All those solvents will be trapped in there, and it can start bubbling up. So that's it for this video, guys. Hope you have enjoyed watching it. Stay tuned for part 2, and until the next one, get out there and paint some shit. Thanks for watching, and this has been another Gunman production.